would set up Bethany best for the future. And I think just through a lot of prayer and discernment, I'll say, and I think it talks about this in the FAQs online, we actually hired an outside consulting firm to come in to essentially vet Scott and like compare him to what an external list of candidates might look like, and also understand like his strengths and growth areas and all of those things. So we just went really in depth, I would say, and kind of put you through the ringer and all of that. But in all of that, it was that process of discernment, of understanding, hey, what is the right move? And I agree. I think we are taking the route of continuity to a degree, but I think some of the things that I feel privileged over the last year to have seen on council that you don't necessarily see, and I hope we get better at showing this to the whole church, is that Bethany, I don't think, is in a place of being static right now. I think we are figuring out how, as a church, we can grow, how we can. I think it connects a lot to what Silas was talking about today, of like our confession of sin, you know, as a community, the collective. I think the ministry of racial justice and reconciliation that has come out of you know, a lot of work from all locations, and there's been a lot in depth in this last year. Like we are learning how to confess, I would say, in that, and also figuring out where God would have us grow. And a lot of our discussions were around, you know, is Scott going to be the person who we believe would best lead us through that? And the answer, like through our discussion, was yes, we believe he is the right person for that. And so, long story short, loved the question, and it was a question that we wrestled with quite a bit. So.
Yeah, I would say I love the question. It's the first time it's been asked in 7 town halls. It's a really brave question. That's like, are we going the right place? Because if we're going the right place, then continuity makes sense. If we're not going the right place, then maybe we should have shaken the snow globe a bit and let things fall into place. And I think why I'm feeling ready to say yes if the job is offered to me is the goals that the council's identified and the pastors are working towards on discipleship and race and justice are such amazing places where we're not done yet there by any stretch. And Northeast had started the racial reconciliation journey before the whole church named it as priority in 2016. We just haven't hit any significant milestones, and there's been an acceleration this year with Taylor Greer joining the team. But I think I made the case, others too, to just do the outside hire. You're kind of unplugging, and then you're doing a reset and maybe the church needs that. Maybe it's like, hey, let's just bring in the outside leader. Let's go interim for a couple years and like fallow ground and kind of start over. But I think for a lot of folks on the inside, there's like, but we're not where we need to be to push pause, and we feel like there's people that are here that have identified our gaps and hungry for where God's leading us. So because the goals feel true, then the continuity makes sense, you know. And you see that on like the marketplace and and the Amazon, like the internal, like Bezos steps down, names Jassy. It's like, oh, for the investors, we need continuity. You see it in the athletic world. Chris Peterson steps down, Jimmy Lake is named right away because, well, there's this incoming class. Like, but for the church, does continuity make sense? To me, it makes sense if we've been listening to God and saying, we're going somewhere God's taken us and we're not there yet. Do we have the people on board that we think can to keep moving and keep, I missed Silas's message, but what I talked about up north this morning was about just getting real and like in our vulnerability, naming our brokenness and using confession to like lead us to a place where God can restore and redeem and reconcile. So yeah, obviously the wrong guy to talk about continuity. But ready to do the work. So, and there's this thing at Green Lake too, where Richard, he had seen so many churches that did the hard reset and how disruptive that is for certain communities that are really attached to their speaker. I think the hard reset for the Green Lake location would have been really challenging because they're really connected to Richard's voice, less so in the other 5 locations. So that's where, when the council was creative about this next step, where Richard actually wants to come back and still be the voice to that community, potentially it's a win-win if the leaders that are committed to leadership are really willing, not just make it easy or, continuing for the sake of like not rocking the boat. So hopefully what we can do is maintain a continuity of teaching and certain strengths of Richard's leadership, and then lean into new practices of listening to where the Spirit is taking us and really doing some good, true work. I mentioned I'm with all these other churches and leaders from around the country. Deeply encouraging to see churches that have bravely taken the roadmap to reconciliation and some of the fruitfulness they're experiencing through their ministry. That's been this like, whoa, we're not there yet, but seeing other folks that are doing, starts to get more hopeful for me, because you see like practical milestones and mile markers on the journey. Like, well, these could be tangible things we need to hit in the season ahead. So, but follow-up question, did we scratch that itch? More. Okay, thank you for coming. See ya. Bye now. Thanks for coming. Yeah, John. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, I'll throw it to you next. So the question at home, what have been the supernatural markers of where God has moved in this process? Not even the consultant or the human. Like, how do we know as a congregation that God's been in this? Obviously, there's trust with the council, but are there stories or illustrations? Because in previous times when Bethany built the sanctuary building, there were all church opportunities to pray, and then God would move, and then the church would have a testimony like, whoa, God did that thing. And this wasn't like that because of the nature of the search and more anonymous. But I just tell you 2 quick stories, because someone at North said, like, you talked a lot about the human side. Tell us some God stuff. So personally for me in 2019, I came out of sabbatical where Richard had shared some of his heart, some of these things, and just in a similar way to my calling in 2008. And this is something for some of your, maybe this isn't as comfortable for you growing up in, certain expressions of the Christian faith, or you haven't had that experience. So at times it can leave us to feeling like, well, how come God doesn't speak to me that way? So I share this not to be a discouragement, but to be an encouragement of the way that God has moved. But this was right before 2020, and in a time of prayer, North does these worship nights pre-COVID quarterly, in a time of kind of distress in my spirit, praying. And the rest of the group was worshiping. I was just kind of kneeling and praying. And actually, my wife had her hand on me. She was praying, and she could tell there was a disturbance in my spirit where she was like, oh, something was happening. And I had this, I had a strong vision from God in that time of prayer where I won't give all the details, but just imprinted it in my spirit coming out of this prayer time. I felt like God said, I want you to lead. At that time, I was getting a bit discouraged. Like, is this, what is the process going to be like? And why did certain things happen in certain order and all this and that? But I felt God really calling me to stay present. God, I want you to lead if the context is right. And then I'll tell you a different story. Just recently, our last all-staff time we meet twice a month as an all-staff. And I guess this was 2 times ago. Andrew just led us in worship really beautifully a week ago. But right before that, 2 weeks before that, we had 2 components of our staff 1-hour meeting. One was a time of prayer led by our Ballard lead pastor. One was a time of reconciliation theology training by Taylor. And during the time of prayer, Brad opened us up to say, like, is God giving you a picture, a word? And what started to happen, I've been at Bethany almost as long as you guys, about 18 years. I'd never been part of a prayer time like that, where someone started to pray in tongues. Someone started to get like, God's given me a picture. Someone else read a scripture that they said God had given. Someone else gave an interpretation to the tongue. I share this not to be like, whoa, where's Bethany going? That's too far, that's too charismatic. It was a new work that the Spirit was doing. It was a marker to me coming through this where God was saying, I'm going to be good to you if you keep calling. Like, if you're humble and you're obedient, I will be good to you. And then Taylor led into this kind of training and theology of reconciliation about feeling othered for her in her story, being a Black single woman, but kind of normalizing that all of us carry a bit of otherness in us, and then finding unity through the otherness. And then by the end of the staff meeting, it was like, look what God has just done here. Like, we just took a significant step. Staff culture has been really tricky over the last 20 months. So God's been speaking to me into the calling. God's been, I think, confirming this from those that have been in it just a little bit longer than the congregation to say, the fruit from the tree is good. Let's continue on the journey. And I don't know if you guys want to talk at all about, or Kelly, about like how when you as a council prayed, some of what you were hearing or discerning.
Yeah, what I can say is I think so obviously the conversation has been ongoing for a really long time, but in the sense of council really deeply engaging in this conversation this year, and my understanding is they first at a like real deep level looked at it kind of towards the beginning of last year, in front of COVID, and Richard was already at that time thinking that it might be the time to transition, and then COVID hit, and so that gave that prompted Richard to say, okay, this isn't the right time for this. This is there's too much going on, and we need kind of that sense of continuity through this season. And so kind of that delayed the conversation a year. And so I think it was probably around March council meeting this year where we, in the council-only session, started to really revisit the question. And we tasked, it was tasked to all of us, individually. So I can't speak for everybody on council, but I can speak for myself in the sense of we were tasked with, hey, part of this is from each successive meeting, we need to really lift this whole process in prayer. Council has a tricky task of being, our bylaws assign council with the role of nominating the next senior pastor. So it's probably the most significant role that council has. And so we knew that was something that, we wanted to be Spirit-led. And I think there is a difficulty there in that it is the church hiring the senior pastor. It's not council we're nominating the senior pastor, but it is the church. So we are essentially trying to represent everyone, but without being able to bring everybody into that conversation during that time is a tough place to be. And I think through that time, that just elevated the importance of us being in prayer and being in the Word and discerning personally. And so I know personally I took that responsibility very strongly. I think that a lot of council members did as well. And I know even through that, I think people's just the feelings of just from what they communicated in our in our council meetings of how we were approaching the question. Like we started off in a lot of different places, I would say, and over the course of the time, over those conversations, through prayer, through discernment, there was a lot more alignment, I would say, than any of us expected, in understanding that, feeling collectively that this was the best route to go, the right recommendation from council for Bethany. So I hope that helps. It is, I acknowledge for sure the difficult nature of something that feels a little bit more behind closed doors than the church holistically approaching a process like location. So. Yeah, so I should know this answer right away. The council is made up, I think, of about 10 individuals right now. Do you know? 11. And so there right now, there's a goal for the membership of council to be as representative of the congregation as we can. I would say we're not probably entirely where we want to be, but we've been able over time to get better representation from different locations. As an example, there was a period of time, so Adam Runyons was on council and I think was the council president for a while, but there was a period of time where Northeast didn't have anyone on council, and so I think I'm the first, I believe, Jack, you probably would know better, to follow since then as a Northeast representative, but we have good spread from the different locations. There's we actually look at the when nominations are brought forward, what's our representation in different age ranges and just demographics, and all of those things come into play. And so I think the goal going forward will continue to be to have council be more representative of the church. I think something that has also been expressed in meetings is that it hasn't always looked that way. A lot of council at times has looked kind of folks who were at Bethany wouldn't necessarily see themselves in the council members as a whole. I don't know if there's a place where our names are listed, but so I don't think you have a lot of ability to see any bios on all the people in council or something like that. But yeah, so there are folks that have been, it's not to any degree self-nominated that I'm aware of, that there are folks that have been nominated within the church to come represent, and they're Bethany members is, I think, the only primary qualification at this point. But it's also something that if anybody here is interested in, please talk to Jack, talk to me, talk to Scott. It's something that is available for folks to take part in, and they are always looking for people to be a part of it. I feel like I missed some of your question, but cool.
Yeah, that's the members meeting. That's why the question was about what is the process for council? 11 voting members plus a treasurer, made up hopefully of women and men of different ages and ethnicities from around our 6 locations. It's not United Nations, so one from Northeast and one from North, one. But in general, we aim to have the council be representative of the church. The members meeting tomorrow night is so significant because members vote, but then also members at each location are shaping, hey, hearing a report, what's going on, asking good questions, getting involved. And then each location has what's called the local advisory team. These are people that are also lay-led that are like digging in locally with leadership. So yeah, the council is a great opportunity. At times, like Kelly said, they're nominated by membership, by, do they serve with their life? Do they model the characteristics of leaderships that, godly leaders are called to? And then is there a diversity present within the council? A couple years ago, one of my friends was like, that council doesn't look like a church that I'd want to be at. It's all white. He's Latinx. He's like, I don't understand why this looks like this. Long story short, his name is Alberto. He's now on council, where he kind of raised his hand to say, that's not okay, and started. So there was a value, but oftentimes you can miss the value in how it's actually lived out. So the value of representation was being not hit well. And so right now there's 2 people of color that are BIPOC persons and a third that's joining if the vote of affirmation goes well tomorrow night. Because our hope would be all locations, women and men. We're an egalitarian church that we believe women have the ability to lead as men do. And it's really important in a city like Seattle that's 45% people of color, that our church, both our congregations, but congregation will model leadership. So our staff and our council should be like the city we're trying to serve. So there's a trajectory to where we're going. We're not there yet, but I think that we're on the right road.
Just real quick too, Susan, one more building block that wasn't mentioned is there's a nominating committee that is part of that. So to avoid tapping people in, the council doesn't oversee that. Nobody on the nominating committee is on the council. We do have a member of the nominating committee, Margie Tessier, who's on our LAT. It's our local advisory team, and is on the nominating committee, and has done that for a couple of years. And then those folks go through a long process, and that's kind of where some of the deeper vetting happens. So sometimes a council nominee will come to an annual meeting like tomorrow, and I think sometimes as members you go, this feels a little bit like I'm just rubber stamping, and perhaps the nominating process is intended to protect from that being true, because that's where those members are asking the tough questions and taking a whole slate of people. Not everybody who goes through the nominating process ends up being recommended to be. Some of you have gone through nominating processes and have discerned on your own, like, now's not the time. Thank you for asking, but you've gone through it. And so just know that that's there as well. So.
That's good, thanks.
Maybe there's a couple more, or maybe I know we're past 11:30. Those that know me know that I'm terrible with like keeping an hour-long meeting or a 30-minute meeting if I say it's going to be that. So we're a little past that, or a lot past it. So I want to honor Alicia, because I think you had your hand up when Susan raised hers. And I saw John's hand go up. But then maybe we can, unless there's a really burning question, for sure, but we can also then take a couple minutes to pray for Scott and his family and Bethany. Alicia, go ahead. Do you want to speak into the mic, or do you want me to reframe your question?
I can talk pretty loudly.
Okay.
Yeah. I will try to make it quick. Our clock is gone, so I lost track of where the time is. I want to actually, I do have a question, but I want to start with an affirmation. I feel very led to lead with an affirmation. I am excited about the possibility, Scott, of you serving Bethany in this way. I feel very much like I have seen and feel hopeful about several qualities that I think you bring to this
That's the question is about, I've spoken about management, but Alicia raises a good question about how is this pastor actually having space and call to pastor well. And I think that's an open, I think there's a little bit of certainly curiosity, but even just a little bit of pain for me of being an Enneagram 3. I often will say yes and kind of rush in, and then we'll figure it out on the way. And one of my mentors, who's a pastor in Portland, we're praying and meeting right now about creating a job that there's space to pastor. And I think the sensitivity, again, love and honor Richard, full stop. And Richard wasn't able to pastor leaders very much because of his calling to be a blessing around the world. I've said, I'm not called to the world, I'm called to the city. But being available availability breeds relationship, and relationship then has empathy and then trust. And COVID has destroyed so much trust. So if I'm going to be a good senior pastor to Jack, there's got to be space for us to, how's our families? How's your faith life? We have to do life together a little bit. And so I think my tendency back to that Enneagram 3 thing is to say, I'll do it all. Jack and I are going to, have a 2-hour lunch every 3 weeks or whatever. But my mentor is saying to me right now, like, structure in such a way that you can kind of under-promise and over-deliver, and there's space to, especially in the apostolic ways. Like, if you're going to try to take Bethany to a place we've not been before, then you got to do things that haven't been done up to this point. And that's an open space for me to be praying about right now, because we didn't have much availability with Richard. And depending on the personality of the lead pastor, it was a place of hurt, or it was fine because we all were busy running our own locations. I care a great deal that the senior pastor is in relationship with the location pastors. I truly do. So how do we manage, again, how do I pastor in such a way that there's some space so Jack can say, hey, I don't need you to sign my time card. He doesn't turn in a time card. But I can know what he's carrying. I can know what the community is struggling with, so that together we can be discerning where God is leading us next. That means we're going to have to shape. The senior pastor role is going to need to be shaped a little bit different. It doesn't look like 9 direct reports. So there's a bit of a gap from what I'm saying yes to and what of the needs are to actually be free to pastor. And Bethany, we don't make much of this, but Bethany is, by locations, one of the biggest churches in the city. The city's the biggest in the region. What does God want to do here? Like, do we want to just kind of have Sunday services and let's do 1 Timothy and then, I don't know, let's do Proverbs? Like, or do we want to change the city? And that's where my heart starts to come alive. Like, we've got to, and when I say change the city, it's for the glory of God. Change the church so that we can live into our stated values of being Revelation 7, every tribe, nation, and tongue before the throne of God. So I am openly meeting and praying and reading and listening to the Spirit to say, help me structure in such a way where there's space to pastor and not just manage and not just, So that's, sometimes I can be my own worst enemy because I take on a lot and then I, can't actually, there's not that space. So I don't want Bethany to be a Jim Collins book. I want Bethany to be Christ's bride in this city. We can read Jim Collins' book. I am right now. But I want to be listening to the Spirit of God to say, Jesus, what do you want to do? And then how does that individuate in each location? So the ministry of Northeast is really different than Green Lake. So I think there's a beauty in that plurality. How do we hold relationship even as each location is ministering in different contexts? Richard's done that through his clout and his tradition and some of how Bethany launched locations. What's going to be needed is a new vision to hold us. And it will be less about our history, I think, though that will matter, and more about our future and shared commitments to these priorities like race and justice, discipleship. So I get quite excited because I do think if we're heading, back to Kevin's question, if we're heading to the right places together, we'll be in healthy relationship. And the senior pastor needs to be in a relationship, just like Jack. And Silas and John have done a lot of comparisons with Jack, but there is a mantle of lead pastor here. And if he's so busy writing his sermon and managing his staff that he can't pastor you. Hey, Rowan's sick. Let's call Jack. And I know that I can use that as a, not Rowan being sick, but I can use Jack being able to pastor because I know that he does make space to pastor here. So it's quite a conundrum in the pastoral ministry right now, making space to build relationship with people and listen to God, and yet some of the obligations of being in a church like Bethany with annual plans and goals and meetings, and then how are we not slaves of Sunday service, but kind of laying the Sunday service on the altar of what Christ wants to do in our communities. So I'm afraid I've answered your questions with more questions, but you know my heart of like just being revelatory and vulnerable. So the question is actually, for me, it's a bit of a reframe and it's actually very helpful for present conversations going on with Jesus and me right now about how will I create space to pastor and not just manage Bethany. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. It is, yeah. Yep. Yep. I really appreciate that, yeah. The importance of that job description that reflects the priorities. And mm-hmm. Yeah. And the process literally, and some might see this being a bit backwards, but once the congregation votes, the council brings the job description to me. So kind of surprisingly, I don't actually have the job description. We've talked in round things about it. So these conversations you're having are actually very real time. Great for Kelly to bring back to the council too. So the community goes first, and then the council takes that, builds the job description off that, but it's based on, leading locations, making space, that, kind of pastoral, prophetic, apostolic, like, all right, we're taking ground now because we're not just running an organization. We're in service of a living God that's calling us to some